G'day legends. In this video, we're going to take a look at the Warm Audio WA251. Now, something I used to really enjoy doing is whenever I got a new microphone, I'd record a song and I'd use that mic on pretty much everything and just learn what it sounds like, where it sounds best, what instruments it really excels on, and so on. And so that's what we're going to do in this video. I've owned this mic for quite a few years now, and I just think it's a really good all-rounder. It sounds great on a lot of stuff. So I've made a one mic song for you guys to check out. And then after you've had a listen to that, we're going to dive into the individual sounds. I'll show you how I process them, what they sound like raw, and all of that stuff. So here's my one mic song using the WA251. Always find myself back here again. I just can't escape from the past. My mind's become my worst enemy, sowing seeds of doubt so easily. You never take me, never break me. I'm not backing down. I feel it changing as you're fading. Could this be the start of something new? Something new. So that's a really nice sounding microphone, and with just a little bit of mixing, you can make this thing sound really awesome. And the only sounds in that mix that I didn't use the WA251 on were the bass, which I was plugged in direct to my Great River preamp, and then I just used a plug-in bass amp. And then the piano sound was just a contact sound using Alicia's keys. So just a really nice piano sound. So let's dive into this mix here and the processing and just having listened to the sound raw and processed, just so we can really see how this all comes together. Now, I think it's pretty important to take a look at the mix bus to start with, because I do have some processing that's being applied to everything, which is helping shape the overall mix. So the first thing we have on our mix bus is the SSL bus compressor. And we have a 10 millisecond attack with an auto release, 2:1 ratio, and that's just doing a couple of dBs of gain reduction. You'll never take me, never break me. I'm not backing down. Just glues it together nicely. And then we're following that up with Kiive Audio's N-Fuse. And this is adding some nice sparkle to the mix. We're boosting in some of the red silk saturation, tiny bit of the dark saturation, and then we're also boosting 1 dB at 16K, which is adding a bit of air to the top end. A little bit of compression. I've got the release just set straight down the middle, so just a kind of medium release time. A couple of dBs of gain reduction, as you'll see in a second, and then we've got the blend, the mix knob at 50%. And then we've got a tiny little bit of width boosted into this as well. So just sort of adding a bit of extra spread to the mix. But then on our high pass filter, we've got that at 90 Hertz, which means nothing below 90 Hertz is going to get spread. And we also have a 26 Hertz high pass filter. You'll never take me, never break me. I'm not backing down. I feel it changing as you're fading. So you can hear it's adding some nice presence to the mix, helping things kind of pop a little bit more. We also have just a normal Logic EQ with a 1 dB cut at 324 Hertz. Just a little bit of build up in the mix here, just taking away a tiny bit of mud. You'll never take me, never break me. I'm not backing down. It's subtle, but it helps. And then we're doing our master with Ozone 11. We have just a little bit of EQ, just like a wide scoop at 400 Hertz, just 0.8 dB, but it makes a little bit of a difference. And then just a little boost at around 3K, 0.3 dB, a tiny bit of air, half a dB here at 16K, a tiny little boost at 22 Hertz, just to kind of bring out the sub a little bit. Pretty subtle overall, but just helps shape the mix. The impact module just kind of adds a little bit of glue to the mix as well. Definitely look up what all these things do, because they're pretty cool. And then the imager, which is just adding a bit of width to the high end, but also tucking in the lower mids and the lows, just so it doesn't get too muddy with the spread. Clarity module adds like a little bit of silky air, which is really cool. We're just using a tiny bit of this. And then the stabilizer, we have this in cut mode. When you have it on cut mode, it sort of hones in on frequencies that jump out of the mix. A little bit like Soothe or, Smooth Operator by Baby Audio. It just kind of compresses frequencies that are jumping out. Bit of dynamic EQ on some areas that are kind of building up a little bit. And then our maximizer, which is our limiter, we've got it on the IRC2 mode. And then we're boosting in about 9.6 dBs, a little bit of upward compression and a little bit of soft clipping. And let's gain match this so you can hear what it's adding.
You never take me, never break me, I'm not backing down.
So it's adding some really nice clarity to the mix. So that's our mix bus. Now let's dive into these individual sounds and I'll show you how I process them. Let's take a look at the drums first. Now the drums was a tricky one because again, we're just using one microphone. There's no extra mics on this. This is literally the drums right here, this one channel. And I spent quite a bit of time playing around the placement, experimenting with where the mic was to get the best sound. I tried it like really low in front of the bass drum, kind of like pointing at the kit from down low. And that sounded okay, but the snare sounded a little funny, like a little too wiry sounding. And then having it kind of like up over the kit a bit more, you didn't get any of the thumpy, subby low end of the kick. It got really like boxy sounding. The snare sounded great, but the kick sounded kind of rubbish. So then bringing the mic kind of in front of the kit, as you see in the video, and pointing it like down at the top of the bass drum and at the snare drum, that gets a really great balance of the kit overall. You get the thump of the bass drum, you get the body of the snare. It's kind of like the ideal location, I think, for just an all-rounder sound of the kit. Maybe a different story depending if you're playing rock stuff and lots of cymbals, but doing this kind of like folky stuff worked really good for the one mic position. And another thing that's really important is the polar pattern. So you can switch it between cardioid, omni, and figure eight. And this microphone doesn't handle really loud drums that well. It really clips the capsule out pretty quickly, especially in cardio mode. But switching over to Omni or to figure eight really helps the mic handle those louder sound pressures. So in Omni mode, it sounded a bit bigger, like we got a more extended sound. There's a bit more like air in the top end, a little bit more thump in the kick. And when we put it into the figure eight mode, it kind of rolled off the lows and the highs a little bit, made it sound a little bit tighter and a little bit warmer, which was kind of cool. But I thought for this mix, having it in the Omni got us that full spectrum sound, which sort of worked a little bit better. But both sounded really good. But so I ran with Omni on the drums. So this is what we got on our drums. We've got Alkane by California Dynamic, and we also have just a EQ with a 26 Hertz high pass filter. So this is just tightening up the low end a little bit. And then in Alkane, we pretty much just have it on tape mode at 21%. And then I'm boosting 1 dB at 400 Hertz on the EQ here. Just help give the snare a little bit more body and just to cut through the mix a bit better. I know it seems like a weird place to boost, but it just kind of worked. Normally we want to cut that stuff away and like that's where I'm tempted to cut. But I found with this, like as I cut things away, the drums lost a lot. Like it didn't take much when we're using one microphone to play with the EQ and the drums just fell apart. So try to keep it really simple because the actual sound is really cool. So let's have a listen to this off and on. So you can hear it's not doing heaps to the sound. It's just thickening it up a little bit of saturation with the tape in Alkane. It's just sounding really nice. Now there's one other thing that's going on the drums, and that's a send to a reverb, and we're using Flamingo Verb with the shortest time. So this is going to make it like a really short room sound, no pre-delay, pushing the drive into 70%, so just adding a bit of saturation, boosting the width to 44%, and then I've just rolled off the low pass, so just cutting some of the really high frequencies out of the reverb to around 9K. And this is what it sounds like. I'm going to boost this up really loud so you can hear what it's doing. It's really cool. So adds a lot of 3 dimension to the sound. We've got a mono drum sound, which can sound like really 2D in my opinion. And so having this kind of like wide, short reverb just gives it a sense of space, which I really like. And just a little bit of that on there, man, it makes a really big difference. You can hear as we boost it up, it's a bit weird and phasey because of the whip thing, but when it's tucked down low, really cool. Awesome plugin. Next up, we have our Cymbal Swell. Now, there's a couple of things going on here. We've got an EQ with a high pass filter up to 100 Hertz, just getting rid of some rumble, and then a small cut at 10K, just some like sizzly stuff in the cymbal that I didn't really like the sound of. So just pulling that out just makes the cymbal a little bit darker, which is what I wanted. And then we've got WA251's 1176 Rev E. This kind of makes it sound a bit darker and thicker as well, but I am pushing the compression pretty hard, and then I've rolled the mix knob back pretty far. So this is our mix knob. You can see I've rolled it all the way back. So that's probably like 30%. And that sounds like this. It adds a lot of sustain to the sound. Without the compression. So you can hear it just levels it out, especially on the release of the cymbal. It just like holds it a bit more present, and you can just hear that cymbal for a bit longer. Then we also have a little bit of reverb, and we're using the Audioscape reverberation system. This is like a spring reverb, and I've cut a couple of these frequency bands, a little boost at 6K, and then we've got the mix knob at about 47-50%. Basically just, again, trying to create a little bit of stereo image on the cymbal because we have this down the center, and I just want to like, just spread it out a little bit. Have a listen to what this is adding. Sounds really nice, just spreads it out nicely. So before. Just smooths it out, makes it sound really nice. All right, so then onto our next sound, we have our tambourine. Now again, I had to play around with the polar patterns because tambourine is kind of loud. It was clipping the mic out in the cardio pattern. So I ended up landing on the figure 8 pattern. Like I said before, it kind of rolled off the highs and the lows. And it's a really bright tambourine sound. It's got brass jingles. So having that slightly rolled off top end is actually helping it not be too abrasive. Nice tambourine sound. We've just got a high pass filter up to 278 Hertz, just getting rid of any low end that's not necessary. And then we're using Tape Face by Kiive Audio. And we're boosting into this a little bit, get a little bit of saturation. We've got it on the tape type 3, so different flavors of tape, but yeah, landed upon type 3 here. And then we also have a little bit of saturation boosted in on this side. And we're using 15 IPS. Now 15 IPS generally has a bit more of a rolled off top end as well. So have a listen to what this sounds like. I really love what this is doing to it. Hear how it just smooths it out. We lose those really ultra high frequencies. It just gets rid of that really like tinsely, sizzly sound. Like, I don't know, makes it sound nicer, which is what I like. So we've got the same settings on our shaker. So the same high pass filter and then tape face. Have a listen again to what tape face is doing to this. I love that. Just smooths that percussion out so nice. I'll quickly run you through the bass processing, even though this is nothing to do with the WA251. We're using a Fender P bass, and then I went straight in, and I'm using the Ampeg B15N from Plug-in Alliance, just a nice kind of like thick bass tone. It's a little bit dirty as well. Have a listen to what this is doing. Kind of cool. The raw DI is pretty good as well, but this adds some nice character to it. And then we just got a little bit of EQ, just cutting some 560 Hertz, a little bit of honk out of it, cutting a little bit of 330 Hertz, 1 dB of that. Just getting rid of a little bit of muddiness in the mix where things are building up. And then just doing a cut at 50 Hertz, so there's a lot of subbiness in the kick, and I didn't want the bass to get in the way of the kick, and then we just kind of end up with like all this flabby, subby stuff happening. So making the kick dominate that area more. I did run the bass through the LA2A while I was tracking, so that's why I don't really feel like I need any compression on it. You can see it's pretty level. And then we've got our piano sound, which is just a contact sound, Alicia's keys. It's a really nice piano sound. I got it fairly recently and been playing around with it. Really liking how it sounds. So I've just left this pretty much as is. It's kind of tucked in the background anyway. It's not meant to be a highlight. It's just there to add a little bit of color and a little bit of like a warm hug to the mix. Okay, onto our acoustic guitars. Now I'm going to boost these up a little bit. I have these panned hard left and right, but one of them's louder, more of the focus, and the other one's sort of like tucked back. It's just like a bit of a filler sound. And that's because we're going to have the electric guitar balancing that part of the mix out. So I'll explain that in a minute. But let's just boost these up, have a listen to them. This is what they sound like raw. That is just a really lovely acoustic guitar sound. So I had the mic maybe about like 5-10 centimeters away from the 12th fret, kind of like where the neck and the body join the guitar. It's such a typical spot to mic, but when you get it fairly close, the proximity effect, you get that nice rich low end and also the nice sort of like brightness of the pick in your fingers on the frets, and you get that nice kind of scoop. If you go back a little bit, it gets a bit more mid-rangey sounding. So finding that placement, like if you want a nice lush sound, getting in close and using that proximity effect can be really cool. Just don't go too close to the hole because again, it gets like super boomy. And that was on the cardioid pattern. So this is all the processing we have in the acoustic guitar. On my first mix, I did a whole bunch of EQing and like just like, you know, notched some things out and did this and that. And when I listened to it and I bypassed the settings, the original acoustic guitar just sounded so much better. And I thought, what am I doing? Like, why am I processing this so much? Like, I don't need to. It sounds great. So sometimes it's more about like the balance, like just getting it in the mix, getting the level right. If you have a good sound, you don't have to like EQ it so much. It's a tricky thing. You always feel like you need to get in there and start doing stuff. But if you can bypass the sound and be like, oh yeah, maybe I'm ruining it, that's okay. Just like acknowledge it and then don't ruin it. So that's what I tried to do here. So I've got the S-Quick strip from Kiive Audio and we've just got the high pass filter. I'm not even entirely sure where this is set to. I'm going to assume it's kind of like 80 hertz. So it doesn't sound like it's killing the guitar in any way. So it's fine. And then we don't have any EQ. We've got a tiny bit of compression happening, mostly when it gets a little bit heavier. It's just tickling the compressor. And that's pretty much it. That's all that's doing. And then over here, we've got tape face again, and we're running it in the 15 IPS, which is going to roll off a little bit of the top end, and it's going to make the low end a little bit tighter as well. We've got a tiny bit of saturation, and we are boosting into it a little bit, so we are getting a touch of saturation out of this. And then with our tape types, I'm on mode 2. So have a listen to what this sounds like when we bypass these off and on. So you can hear it's just a little tighter. The low end's not kind of like poking through as much. It just sounds a little bit more controlled. The raw sound, sometimes the lows sort of like jump in and out a bit. The compression's kind of like pulling it in, the high pass filter, the bit of tape saturation. It's just kind of getting that stuff under control, but it's retaining that nice natural acoustic sound. Really happy with that acoustic sound. I think that's really nice. So as I said before, these are double tracked, and the one on the left's kind of like our main acoustic guitar, and the one on the right just sort of sits a little bit more in the background, like this. So that sounds awesome, and we'll balance that out with the electric guitar on the other side. So that's what we're going to have a look at now, is some electric guitar parts. Now with the mic placement, I had this on my Fender Twin Reverb. It's a 2x12 combo, and I had the mic straight down the center of the amp between the two speakers. So not even kind of like close to a speaker or like, you know, near the cone or any of that stuff. It's literally like a foot back from the amp, pointing directly between the two speakers. This just gets like a really nice image of what the amp sounds like, as if you're like standing in front of the amp and listening to it, rather than what it sounds like if you put your ear right up against, which is like what we're doing when we put mics right against a speaker cabinet, which is kind of like not how we hear guitars. Like when we stand in front of an amp and listen to it, that's how we perceive the guitar amp. So I feel like this gives us like a really natural sound of the amp, just like a mic, a foot back, you're just hearing what it sounds like. And I think it works really well with this style of music, particularly like if it's metal, rock stuff, you know, you probably want to get that sort of mic really close to the amp and get that big gritty sound. But for this kind of stuff, the placement that I chose works really well. The cardio pattern as well. So our first batch of electric guitars are just some strums, And part of the sound that I built into it was some tremolo with an eighth note triplet. And then all we have on our guitars is literally a high pass filter up to 77 Hertz and then a small cut 0.3 dB at 740 Hertz. That's basically doing nothing really. So pretty much no EQ on this. And this is what it sounds like. It sounds so nice. And then in our chorus, we've got some big down strums. It sounds awesome and just no EQ on it. Like that's just what it sounds like. So again, chasing that placement and getting your tones right makes a really big difference. So I played around the pedals and just like getting the right pickup for the sound that I wanted. Fender Telecaster, can't go wrong. And so these are double tracked, but our main electric strums is on the right hand side, and then similar to the acoustic guitar, the electric that's on the left hand side is kind of quieter and just sort of there as a filling sound. This is just like a mixing tip kind of thing, but like don't be afraid of like a little bit of like imbalance. Like we are balancing this out, but you can hear one's a strum that sort of just rings out and one's a consistent sound. And so, you know, the acoustic on this side is getting a little more attention. It's pulling a little more weight in the mix. But if we just had everything double tracked and everything double tracked, nothing stands out. It just sort of sounds like a big stereo mess. Like, you know, we can still have our double tracks, but by having one louder and one louder over here, we still get some cool separation, but we get a bit more ear candy by being able to hear things in different locations. And then our next sound, I just added a bit more drive to it, but otherwise it's got the exact same settings, just a bit of that kind of like Western kind of vibe. Just a cool sound. And that's panned a little bit off to the left. Not hard left, but kind of like 50%. It just sounds awesome without any EQ to undo it. It's just got that high pass filter on it, and that's it. Then next up we have some slide guitar. So this one has a high pass filter and then a little cut at 2.2K, just some like chimey harshness in the guitar. And then we also have the Logic sample delay, and we're delaying the right side by 10.2 milliseconds. So basically just 10 milliseconds. And what that means is we're basically spreading this sound out using the Haas effect. So we're going to hear the sound on the left before we hear it on our right, and it's going to make it sound wide. Now this can create phase issues. If you listen to it in mono, it can collapse down. It can be a little bit weird sounding, but this isn't a predominant sound in the mix. So when you have sounds that aren't like the main feature and you want to spread them out and you've only got a mono sound, you can definitely use this effect. Stuff like pads, stuff like this guitar, like ambient slide guitar stuff, it works really well. But you know, if it was a prominent sound like a lead vocal and you put this on it, it's going to sound super weird. And then when you listen to mono, it's going to sound weirder as well. But on sounds that are not forefront, this can be really cool. So have a listen to what this is doing. I'll bypass these and I'll add them on as we listen. So pretty cool. That high pass filter is doing a lot to clean up sound. There's a bunch of like rumbly stuff going on there that's not very nice. And then that spread, it's just making it sound really cool. And then when we turn it back down to where it sits in the mix, it sounds like this. It's pretty cool. It could maybe be a tiny bit louder, but we also have some vocals that are kind of mirroring this melody, so they kind of all stack together. So it's probably okay where it is. So our next sound is a mandolin. So I actually haven't played the mandolin in a while, and the other day I had an artist in the studio and they wanted some mandolin on a track, so I pulled it out from under my couch. It's been gathering dust for years, and looked up the chord charts and gave it another go. And so while it's fresh, I thought, let's just chuck some mandolin in this track. and it sounds kind of cool, but man, those frets are so small and my fingers hate them. So don't judge me too harshly on this because it's not the best mandolin playing, but this is what it sounds like without any processing. Okay, so it's a little rough, but anyway, in the mix it's okay. So 147 hertz high pass filter and then a little boost at 925 hertz. This kind of brings out like that nice chimey melodic sound in the mandolin, whereas like if you try and boost up here, usually just ends up sounding kind of harsh. You just get like the stringy, scratchy sound, which is not really what sounds nice. This is the sweet spot here. And then I'm also using sample delay on this as well. It's not a super loud sound in the mix, but I just wanted to spread it and just fill some space with it a little bit. So we've got a 10 millisecond delay on the left, so the opposite to what the slide's doing. So they're going to be spread out slightly differently, so they're not going to overlap too much. That's kind of cool. And then we also have Slate Digital's Revival, just adding a little bit of sparkle to the top end. So just getting that really bright excitement out of it, but just a little bit. Couple of things that I forgot to mention as we went. Some of these sounds are being sent to some sends, so our shaker and our tambourine and our acoustic guitars and our slide are all going over to this really cool reverb over here, which is Tape Spaces by Half-Light. It's just like a reverb that's being run through tape, which sounds really cool. And we've got it on the Luft setting and just like a bit of low cut, a bit of high cut, pushing the length a little bit, 1.2, and then it sounds like this. So just a little bit of that. Sounds really good in the mix. So then our cymbal swell, bass, piano, electric guitars, and our mandolin, they're all being sent to another reverb over here, which is Valhalla. We have it on a smooth plate, 1.4 second decay, and then a low cut at 380 hertz and a high cut at 5.9K. Just a nice sounding reverb, and the vocals are also being sent to this as well. So now we're going to take a look at our vocal processing. So the vocals have been tuned with Melodyne, but then I've also just got a tiny bit of Metatune on here as well, 62%. I think it sounds all right. And this is what they sound like unprocessed.
Always find myself back here again.
That's a really nice vocal sound. I did track it through my Audioscape Opto. Always track vocals through a little bit of compression, just helps you get a really nice sound straight away and means you don't have to do as much compressing in the box. So then let's run through what I'm doing to this. I've got that little bit of Metatune, and then I've got Pro MB, which is doing a de-esser setting.
Always find myself back here again.
So just a little bit of de-essing with that. And then we have our EQ. This is really simple stuff. 116 hertz high pass filter, and then a 0.5 dB cut at 250 hertz with a wide bell. So just kind of like taming those low mids just a tiny bit. And then a 0.5 dB cut at 11K with the high shelf, just pulling in that sort of sizzly top end just a tiny bit. It's pretty subtle.
Always find myself back here again. Always find myself back here again.
Yeah, it's not doing heaps. It's just tightening it up a little bit. And then we've got some extra compression here. So even though the compression of the Opto sounds good, I felt like we needed a little bit more just because of how dense the mix gets at times. And I tried a bunch of different compressors and I ended up coming to this one because it didn't change the sound too dramatically. It just made it sound better. It didn't add heaps of saturation or heaps of like tonal shift to the vocal. It just made it sound a little nicer.
Always find myself back here again.
Couple of dBs gain reduction, level match with the output. Sounds good.
Always find myself back here again. I just can't escape from the past.
It sounds good. It's just making the vocal like a little denser, a little more present, compressed. Like it's just compressing it, you know, in a good way. So I like that. Then we've got Waves L2 Ultra Maximizer on here. This is basically just to catch some like sort of harsh peaks in the voice, usually on like words that start with I, like this one here.
I'm not backing down.
And this one coming up.
I feel it.
So you can see that I just like grabbed it. Without it, it's just like pokes out of the mix in a kind of harsh way. This sort of like softens it a little bit. Otherwise, it's not really reacting on most of the vocals. And then we've got a second round of de-essing, and this is the Iosis E2 de-esser. We've got it on around 50% with the mix knob. It sounds like this.
Always find myself back here again.
Just helping smooth out those S's and T's. And then lastly, mono to stereo chorus at the end of the vocal chain, 5%. It's just adding just a little bit of flavor to the vocal. Pretty subtle as well.
Always find myself back here again.
Okay, so that's our vocal chain. Then we are sending it into the vintage verb as we had before.
Always find myself back here again.
Just a little bit of that, just to add a bit of space to it. And then I also have Echo Boy on here with a 16th note delay. Tiny bit of feedback, rolling off some lows and highs, and then just pushing the saturation. This is just to create like a bit of a slap effect, which is going to make the vocal sound a bit fuller and a bit warmer. So I'll crank it up so you can hear what it's doing.
Always find myself back here again. I just can't escape from the past. My mind's become my worst enemy.
So just a little bit of that. Just add some nice thickness to the voice. Having it loud's cool. You can definitely have it as a loud effect. You just kind of need to build that into your mix just so it works. Kind of chucking it on at the end can sometimes just make everything sound messy. If you want that effect, add it in early on so you can work around it. And then lastly, got some throw delays. That's going into the D16 repeater, and that's on a quarter note. We've got a little bit of spread on it, and then just rolling off some lows and some highs, and then rolling the color back so it's a little bit darker.
Always find myself back here again. I just can't escape from the past.
Just adding some interest to the mix. And then we also have a double track vocal, which has pretty much everything the same. It just doesn't have the limiter on it.
Always find myself back here again. I just can't escape from the past.
Just add some nice chorus to the vocal, thickens them up a bit. When the chorus comes in, I've got a little boost in the double track to just kind of help make the vocals pop a bit more in the chorus.
You never take me, never break me. I'm not backing down.
Sounds cool. And then lastly, we've got these backing vocals. This is what they're doing. All right, so some pretty simple processing going on here. Just got meta tune on here. I didn't melodyne these. This is just a little bit of tune just to tighten them up. I find with these kind of vocals, if you can tune them a little less, they kind of sound a bit bigger, a bit groupier, just having a little bit of pitchiness in there, but not enough to be like gross. It definitely makes it sound like more voices. If you make them too perfect, it starts to just sound like one voice and it doesn't sound very big anymore. So I've got 4 tracks of this, and 2 of them are like 70% panned, and then the other 2 are hard panned. Just giving us some nice spread on the voice. Then we have a high pass filter up to 100 Hertz. Nothing special going on there. And then we have Kiive Audio's filk channel, and we've got the preamp on. This is probably adding a little bit of color to the sound, but we're not boosting anything here. It's just what it is. And then we are using EQ2, and we're boosting 3 dBs of air. We're cutting 3 dBs of the low end, and then we are cutting 2.4 dBs of 700 Hertz. We also have compressor 2 just kind of sitting there, but it's not really doing anything, but it probably is adding a little bit of color as well. But yeah, there's no compression going on. So it's a little bit more balanced now, but it's a little bit airier as well. So it's going to help those vocals like kind of like pop in the mix a little bit, have their own little bit of space there. Cutting that 700 Hertz especially is making room for the lead vocal and like all the other stuff that's going on.
You never take me, never break me. I'm not backing down. I feel it changing as you're fading. Could this be the start of something new?
I think that sounds awesome. And so you can see it's mirroring what that slide's doing. So they're kind of working together just to create that melody in the background. And these backing vocals are also getting a lot more reverb. So they're being sent into our vintage verb a lot heavier than the lead vocal. So kept it pretty simple. There's no buses or anything like that. It's pretty much just all the individual channels just being fed into a mix bus, and then just the processing on the individual channels, which is cool. You don't always have to overcomplicate everything. You know, we could bus the acoustics together, we could bus the electrics together. Sometimes you can just keep it super simple like this, and that is totally fine. And the goal here was just to try and keep it organic sounding, like keep a nice sort of warm, cozy sort of mix, but also just making sure we can hear all the sounds well and that it's not muddy sounding, which I think I've achieved. So I'm pretty happy with how it sounds. Now let's have a listen to what it sounds like completely raw. So this is just like leveled and panned, but without any processing, just a limiter on the end, just to make sure we didn't like peak out. And this is what the WA251 sounds like with absolutely nothing. So no mix bus processing, no individual channels. This is completely raw. And we'll jump between that and my mixed version, just so you can hear the potential of it all.
Always find myself back here again. I just can't escape from the past. My mind's become my worst enemy, sowing seeds of doubt so easily. You never take me, never break me. I'm not backing down. I feel you changing as you're fading. Could this be the start of something new? Of something new.
So pretty awesome. You can hear the raw sounds. They sound really nice, super easy to work with. It's a great microphone, super easy to mix and get a really good sound. So if you've been looking for a good all-rounder mic, you're interested in a tube microphone, been looking at the WA251 and you're thinking about picking one up, if you want to support this channel, then use the Sweetwater affiliate link in my description below. Using that link and then buying a piece of gear. It doesn't have to be the 251, it can be any piece of gear. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but a small commission from the sale comes back to this channel. And that just helps support the time that goes into making videos like this so that you can make better decisions about buying pieces of gear. And if you want to support this channel in another way, you should definitely go over to my website. You'll find a link in the description below. Check out my range of drum samples and mixing courses. Grabbing any of those is a massive support. And if you're interested in watching a full mixing tutorial where we take a song from completely raw to mixed and finished, then check out this next video coming up.
You never take